After 6 years in opposition, ACT is back in government as part of the National-led coalition. I'm joined by its leader and Minister for Regulation, David Seymour.
G'day, Brent.
G'day. I mean, looking to 2024, what are the key priorities then for you? I mean, obviously you've got a lot of work to do to set up this new Ministry for Regulation.
Yep. So if you start at the highest level, I mean, the government needs to get the books back in order, or at least start making demonstrable progress towards that. At a regulatory level, we need to get the regulatory standards bill, the legislative backstop to better regulation in place. We need to establish the Ministry of Regulation, and we need to get to work putting real robust impact analysis on new laws and start rifling through the piles of old laws which some politician, no one even knows who it is anymore, left us with. We're still paying the costs of compliance, and though no one can remember who did it or what the point was. So that's certainly important. And I also think that right across the public sector, you know, there's a huge amount going on. If you look at Brooke van Velden as Minister of Workplace Relations, there's coalition commitments to deal with things like health and safety law and personal grievances and so on. Nicole McKee's got a huge job getting the courts functioning because the backlogs there are actually gumming up the economy and replacing the Arms Act. And Karen Chua has completed this extraordinary journey from a victim of SIPS to the Minister for Children. That's not to mention Andrew Hoggard when it comes to fresh water and the environment, and also you know, Simon Court working with Chris Bishop on replacing the Resource Management Act, getting some decent infrastructure funding and financing. So it's, you know, there's a lot of work.
I mean, well,
it's pretty ambitious.
Talk about the RMA, I guess, and I guess one of the ironies is that you've gone back to the RMA as the short-term measure. So how soon do you think you can put up a full replacement for the RMA?
Well, the irony is that the previous government managed to come up with something worse than the RMA. I mean, I never would have forecast that, but I started saying over a year ago, I think this thing's so bad we're going to have to go back to the RMA, and people said you couldn't possibly. I think more and more people have seen that actually the Natural and Built Environments Act, with its novel terminology such as te oranga o te taiao, and its otherwise largely similar form and function to the RMA, has basically given you the same principles with new terminology, which means the same problems plus 15 years of court jurisprudence interpreting the thing, which hardly seems worthwhile. Your question about how long it takes to have a new regulatory management regime, well, you know, I would hope that the government will do that by preparing the law this year and passing the law next year. But far be it from me to say, you know, it's Chris Bishop and Simon Court that are taking this on, and I don't want to tell them what the time frame should be, because they're the ones with an awesome task.
And, I mean, more broadly on regulation, what's going to be the approach? Because, I mean, you talked about health and safety, and I suppose you've talked about some environmental regulations, because presumably you're not wanting to make workplaces less safe. So how are you striking the balance between, you know, necessary regulation that's going to work and stripping away what you see as the sorts of cost-loading regulations that are unnecessary?
Well, I just asked the simple question. You know, how much does the regulation cost, and how much benefit does it have? Because every time we spend too much money securing safety, we are actually less safe. People say, hang on, how are they going to be? Well, the answer is our society has less money to spend on safety elsewhere. So I'll give you one example. We put in place these earthquake regulations. We're now requiring people to strengthen buildings up and down the country. The regulatory impact analysis at the time said that it would save almost no lives, and those saved would be exorbitantly expensive. New Zealand is all the poorer for that. I'm also the Associate Minister of Health. I'm responsible for farming, and I'm acutely aware of what happens when we don't have enough money to pay for the life-saving pharmaceuticals people need. So when people say, oh, well, you can't ever skimp on safety, well, actually, every time you spend too much on safety, you skimp on safety somewhere else. And that's why we need to make sure that something like the Health and Safety at Work Act, you know, currently says all practicable steps must be taken. That's absurd. I mean, the best practicable step is don't do anything. that's safe, but actually we're all the poorer and worse off as a result of doing it. Making it all reasonable steps, now that would be progress.
And I mean, are there any particular regulations that you can identify now and say, hey, that's going to go?
Well,
in whatever area.
Yeah. Well, I was just told today that there's a region of New Zealand where it's forbidden to collect certain types of recyclable material from the curbside. So they're getting in touch and they're pretty upset about that. There's a lot of minor areas like that annoy people. But I would look at the big questions around, do we need to have a separate pharmaceutical regime? Do we need to have medical councils, pharmaceutical councils, nursing councils that impose different rules and requirements from some of our friends around the world that actually have better healthcare systems at the moment? What about the environmental angle? Do we need to make it so difficult to build irrigation infrastructure on farms? So there's almost half a dozen examples of silly rules from very small to very large that could be got rid of.
In terms of the portfolios that ACT ministers are responsible for, and I suppose the issues that you have particular interest in, I mean, how should we judge you at the end of 2024 in terms of, are you making progress or not?
Well, I think you'll see that Brooke van Velden will have made big progress in making it easier to get by in terms of employing people, in terms of health and safety. You'll be at the very least making progress in those directions. In her DIA portfolio, it is a bit of a potpourri. It's New Zealand's oldest government department. It's about everything added on, but I think you'll see that she's pretty wily and also has a sharp pencil, and she'll be making that more efficient and more streamlined. In terms of Nicole, you'll see progress on better ways of getting people through the court rapidly using better technology, and you'll see her some way, if not having introduced a new Arms Act. I think you'll see Andrew working on the pricing of regulations and compliance fees around food safety and biosecurity, and also making, for example, animal welfare much more realistic about people that actually farm, and so it goes on. I mean, you'll see Simon Court making a big impact around making sure that resource management and infrastructure funding and financing reform is real, and I think you'll see Karen start to put in place things like removing Section 7AA and setting up some real accountability and tension within Oranga Tamariki so that kids actually have an advocate in there, not just adults. So, yeah, sorry about the diatribe.
And your ministry will be set up and starting to actually weed out unnecessary...
Yeah, within a year, absolutely. Yeah, possibly. I would hope much sooner.
When do you hope that will be up and running properly?
Oh, look, I would hope that it will be done in the first half of next year. I hope to be in the first quarter of next year. We'll see how the holidays go.
What's the process for setting up that ministry? I mean, how's it being done?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, you've got to work out what its purpose is, what it does, so that work's underway. You've got to find someone to be the initial leader of it, so that's been, just about underway. And then, the Governor General...
Who are these sort of... I mean, is it Treasury? Who's kind of providing that official sort of advice for you on that?
Oh, well, at this point, we're getting advice from Treasury, but also, the Minister for the public sector or public services involved.
Yep.
And also potentially have the Prime Minister's or the DPMC involved. So, at a very high level, the central agencies are involved in giving birth to a new one. And ultimately, the Governor General has to make an order in council to bring a department into existence. So we'll ask her to do that. Probably at some point in the first or second quarter next year. Because
you wouldn't want that to turn into just another bureaucracy, would you?
Well, it's very important that you have a clear purpose, and this is a Ministry of Regulation. Regulation is the process of government placing restrictions on the use and exchange of private property, and the way that it will operate is to ensure that new regulatory initiatives are properly assessed by problem definition and cost-benefit analysis, and along with some other principles, and that the existing stock of regulation will be up for high-stakes review on a periodic basis so that people can start to identify what rules ail them and who's responsible for keeping them. If the Minister currently wants to keep bad rules, then they can, but at least you can see whose decision it is. At the moment, people are busy following rules made by some minister a decade ago and no one can even remember who they are.
David Seymour, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
For more content just like this and all the latest business and political news, head over to mbr.co.nz.